So let's talk about the current state. Without a doubt, we know we have shortages, right? The shortages in terms of the material shortages. So you talk about the raw material acquisition to the aggregation into the production sites of our manufacturing capacity, consolidation, middle mile transportation, and then from port all the way down to the customer network. You see the bottleneck. And that's really, literally the end-to-end supply chain snapshot. Increased freight prices. Again, you start to think about some of the numbers we've seen, the inflation that we've absorbed. It's historical. And in spite of that, we continue to see higher volume throughputs coming out of it. If you think we teach forecasting, and you learn all the modeling and various types of forecasting method to be accurate, guess what? The demand forecasting is one of the lousiest things in the world of supply chain today. There is no way anybody can forecast anything, any reasonable error in consideration, right? So we are literally out of whack when it comes to supply and demand side of the equation. The port congestion and supply chain bottlenecks. You'll get to hear from Gene and Noel, respectively, from Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Right? It's not the ports are not productive. It's opposite. The volume that we are ingesting, our networks are just not capable of actually managing the throughput at the level that we started for various reasons. And I know over the next 2 days, you'll hear the experts talk about what's driving those shortages and the congestions. But also one thing that we need to look at in current state is a changing consumer attitude. You think about e-commerce and adaptation of e-commerce. You go back pre-pandemic, and then you start from from pandemic, which is March of 2000 to now. It has absolutely gone logarithmic scale. So now you have this entire baby boomer and elderly generation. They would have probably made a trip to the store. But because the bricks were closed or disrupted, they start to go on the clicks, primarily Amazon and many other online platforms. And guess what? That created a gigantic wave of small packages. And how does that change? And then what that's going to likely to do, even post-pandemic. Underneath all of these things, what's not being seen by consumers and what we don't get to hear in the news bites is a digital adaptation. The digital transformation is happening in front of us. And what is constant in this digital transformation, that either you participate or you stand by. The rate by which the transformation curve is being exposed to us, that it is disrupting the way we do things and the way we run supply chains faster than ever before. Right? So we have seen this 90-day sprint. Ports capacity being opened up, right? So Gene, Knowles, and their teams are working 24/7. That's a great news. But together, those ports, remember, the San Pedro Bay represents 40% of the volume. How do we then ingest that volume as they expand their throughput capacity by the rest of the network? Well, Walmart, FedEx, Home Depot, UPS, and Targets, and so on and so forth, they've actually partnered in these collaborative efforts to open up their capacity to ingest volume. And really, trucking and rail freight, all of them, they've actually tried to reciprocate this effort. So the time will tell the difference is how private industry adapts to this open capacity to try to relieve some pressure at the port. But let's talk about how did we get here. So I did horizon scan since 1980. And there is an analysis called the supply chain risk, the global supply chain network risk assessment. Right? This is a comparative analysis of every element on every single part of the world. It's a busy slide, you can't sit, but what I want to communicate to you, this is 2014. Right? Prior to this, we had SARS, we had many other outbreaks around the globe, regional albeit, not one of those events been called out as a supply chain disruption. Right? This is how corporate multinational companies realize that cargo theft, child labor, some of the CSR-related issues, they were in the forefront, often missing some major natural disaster, geopolitical tensions, being part of that. So if you think about that this is the brain that feeds into the C-suites in a Fortune 100, Fortune 500, and we don't really build our network to anticipate this. And this is as of 2014, right? It's 1980 to 2014. COVID would not have been on the radar screen for anybody. So we got here simply focusing on speed and the cost without taking two other dimensions, what I call the triple bottom line, sustainability and resiliency. So I think the challenge that lies in front of us is how do we now take those two things in consideration, right? We have for far too long, we've built this long string supply chains that they've become very efficient, right? However, can we allow this map to look different, or should it be the same? My proposition is if we do not change our network design and you don't build the what-if scenarios for the future pandemics, natural disaster, or geopolitical tension, I'll tell you, your shareholder, your stakeholders, your customer may not give you a second opportunity because they'll look at this as a missed opportunity learning from the COVID, what I call pandemic of the century. There's no surprise, right? We have shifted the production. If you look at it, this is output as of 2019. It's getting recalibrated for 2021. But these are the major supply chain hubs, the nodes. How do we think about this? Depends on your SKU and commodities that you're handling. Can the network support the rebalancing, right? And I'm going to talk about this, the decouplings that I've spoke so substantially, but I've been very careful to say it's the decouplings of our networks without deglobalization. So how do we create that regional customer-centric network, right? So today, let's look at the imports coming into our countries by state. This is the reality. We are the largest consuming economy in the world, and that will not change. To Dean's point, we're not going to be able to manufacture everything at home. We will rely on other countries to continue to support our activity. Do I think we have gone too far on the left to rely heavily? Answer is yes. Can we come somewhere in the middle? You bet. I think we're going to see the future of global supply chain network will be much more resilient in terms of driving things close to home or near shore. So Mexico, Canada, Dominican Republic, these are the countries that are likely to play into the solutions about striking the balance between the speed, the cost, resiliency, and sustainability. So the future mantra as a supply chain practitioner is we single-dimensionally cannot optimize our networks. Cost is important? Absolutely. Is profitability important? You bet. Do we need to give away other two important considerations, which is our sustainability and resilience? And the answer is, I think we need to strike the balance. And that's where you see a lot of conversation is already moving towards. Right? So if you think even today, the volume on a single country dependency and the disruptions continue to expose us, right? Even China is trying to decouple out of their own local network by relying heavily on ASEAN countries. And how do we create those regional customer-centric node that supports the diversity? And if you think about why we ran out of some things, I just illustrated few commodities for you. Right? If I put natural gloves and some of the PPEs, some of these numbers goes into the 95th percentile that the one country controls entire production. then we shouldn't be surprised that if that country happens to face any natural disaster or geopolitical or resource constraint, you're likely to run out of stuff. Didn't propose about stockpiling it. And I think there's a safety stock one can introduce to create level of security. Is that enough? And I think these are the discussions that you guys likely to face over next months and years to come as to what that should look like. How do we reshuffle the resiliency? So key issues. IMF, as you know, last week, recalibrated the numbers and global demand will go down by 1 full percentage. And that is simply because of the supply chain disruptions, the bottleneck. The system is in shock. And it will take us at least 6 to 12 months to rebalance and recalibrate. And that is likely to impact of 1%. You know what that is? That's a 1% of $27.5 trillion economy. That's a significant shock that we don't see now, especially in the US, because we are in a peak season delivery mode. But you're likely to see at some point in the early first quarter, the wind of these things catching up to us, right? So that's IMF forecast of the, and that's, by the way, it's the largest drop in a global demand forecast in a single year. What we see, this consumer demand is, again, we're not traveling, we're not spending too much money on the food, so we have a lot of discretionary spending available, and all we're doing is buying stuff. So that's likely to continue the momentum in terms of the pent-up demand. And then last but not least, in this country, we see the shortages of labor. And this is a phenomena. It's not the COVID phenomena. It's been the 10, 15 years and 20 years in making that we have shortages across the supply chain, drivers being the most crucial part of this equation. And we're going to have to solve for that. So outlook, in my view, what I want to close out with is, how do we minimize the risk of globalizations without reducing the footprint in each of the region? Right? It's not the deglobalization that I think we need to talk about it, because Jeff is absolutely right. Precisely speaking, 1.6 billion people since 1978 has been lifted out of the poverty. And I'm talking about lifting out of the poverty an ability for this 1.6 billion humans on our planet Earth simply because of globalization. So globalization has done great things. It gets a bad rap because we do can somehow use the news bite to see some of the Western advanced democracies has suffered some of the gains because emerging markets and other markets have actually come up. But it's good for both the Western democracies also to participate in those emerging markets, because that's where the largest population is. Between India and China, I look at it, it's 2.5 billion people. Right? You talk about the middle class, that's larger than Europe and US put together. So we need to participate and partake. We need to design our supply chain. So when we talk about decoupling with the mind of being global. Let's talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and blockchain. These are no longer the buzzword, right? When 6 years ago, we signed the memorandum with the Department of Commerce here on the digital initiatives, blockchains and some of the applications in AI and ML was a sort of a outside scan looking on the horizon. Today, they're an integral part of everything we do. So supply chains are going to become very intelligent. And what that's going to look like is the very important things we need to worry about it. And the last but not the least that I want to talk about is the human capital. As we change our supply chains, right, we're going to have a continued deficit of those that are well-trained in this field, that they're expert, but they're global. They know how to design the network and drive not only cost, but also sustainability and the resiliency. So you guys, I stand here to tell you, if there was a time for our industry to be on the pinnacle of looking at the advancement, innovation, and future for next 10, 20, 30 years to be in an absolutely amazing spot, the time is now. So next 2 days, hopefully you will draw into some of the most amazing speakers. They will bring forth some of these ideas, innovations, the resiliency, and rejuvenations of our supply chains. With that, I once again thank you all for being here, and enjoy the summit for next 2 days, and look forward to seeing you guys around. Thank you very much.